The legislative session is officially over. With lawmakers gone from the Capitol, we're going to hear from the president of the state's NAACP conference with reaction to what passed, what didn't, and what they're focusing on as they go forward. Hello and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm John Gray.
And I'm Jamie DeLine. The final days of the legislative session are over, with lawmakers leaving the state capitol and heading back to their home districts.
They had a lot of things they wanted to get accomplished, and some they did.
One of which is medical aid in dying, which would allow terminally ill patients the option to request medication to end their lives. Looking back across the session, the governor did get several pieces of legislation signed, including the bell-to-bell cell phone ban, the Safe for Kids Act, which impacts social media feeds, and a bill that would repeal the 100-foot rule for gas hookups in new homes. Many items that saw a push in the last weeks of the session did not get passed. Some items include the Bigger Better bottle bill, a bill that would allow wine to be sold in grocery stores, and the Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act, which would have reduced single-use plastic packaging. One high-profile item that did not get through is the New York for All Act. That would have helped keep officers and state employees from finding out a person's immigration status without a warrant. That measure would have limited cooperation with immigration enforcement officials, which, according to one lawmaker, contributed to it failing this session.
One major concern that consistently came up would be that passing it would paint an even larger target on the back of New York from the federal government and trigger even further spending or budget cuts.
Joining us now to give additional insight at the end of the legislative session is Eljoy Williams. She is the new president of the NAACP New York State Conference. Eljoy, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'd be remiss, we'll get to all the Albany stuff in a second, but we just got through Juneteenth. I'm assuming you were out there involved in some activities. How are we doing? I mean, I want to talk to you because you're the head of this organization. How are we doing on racial issues here in New York State, do you feel? I mean, I always seem to hear we're doing better, but we've got a long way to go. Is that still where we're at right now in the state?
Yes, because we are still part of this country, which certainly has a long way to go. And even in this state where we have greater representation and we have seemingly friendly folks in office who have the desire to do the right thing, it still requires organizations like ours to push further towards where we need to go. And there are still issues of equity and injustice that we need to address in this state. And so there is never a dull moment in terms of our work to make sure that we're moving to a more equitable future.
All right, let's jump into what happened in Albany. They've wrapped up their session. I always feel like with people who are advocating for causes, it's like a Christmas wish. You ask your parents or Santa Claus for this list, and you get some of what you want under the tree, but some things are not there. Did you feel that way with this legislative session? Or things you wanted that you got and some things you didn't?
Certainly. There were some things that we were able to have great impact on. I know one of the biggest things out of the budget and out of the legislative sessions, for instance, the cell phone use ban in schools, we were able to be influential in that space and make sure that children are not suspended and getting not as much classroom time and instruction time that they need. So we were able to be influential in that regard. Also, in the middle of a strike happening as it pertains to prison reform, able to successfully, through the caucus, introducing legislation to get stronger oversight and reform in terms of the prison system here in the state of New York. We were able to do that. But then to your point, in terms of things we still have to work on, we are still working towards equating to folks that environmental justice is a civil rights issue. And there are still some environmental justice related bills that we were working on that did not pass this session that we're going to continue to organize around as we move into next session next year.
Yeah, with environmental things, I wanted to hit you a little bit on that, where as a reporter covering the Capital Region for decades now, you do start to wonder, like, why are some of the worst things for people always in the worst neighborhoods or the poorest neighborhoods? It's not by accident, isn't it, that some of the more wealthy neighborhoods don't somehow get the pipeline, the train tracks, the plant that's spewing whatever?
Yeah, I mean, and you're right, it's intentional, right? Because the folks who people equate with wealth have greater voice. They make their voices heard, and they remind people of the wealth that they bring to the state. And at the same time, while people are making their voices heard in communities that do not have the same tax base or do not have the same power, people feel comfortable with placing them in those places who are already disproportionately receiving less resources and being dumped upon. And so that is a civil rights issue because for a number of those communities, they are communities that are Black and brown neighbors and friends. And so we want to organize and uplift this issue and say that it is inequitable, right? And downright at some points racist to continue to dump upon these communities that are already experiencing low investment.
I want to circle back to something you said earlier about political involvement at the top of this interview. Looking at your bio on your page, it seems like that's a big thing for you, which is getting involved. And maybe you're not running for governor, but you know what? You could run for a city council seat, a county legislature seat, a school board seat. It really is important for people of a diversity to go after these positions, isn't it? And have a voice, and that's how things will change.
Yeah, and just equating to something you said about wealthier neighborhoods seemingly having more voice. The other thing is people tend to listen to them more. And so that means that those who have a smaller voice, that we have to amplify their voices, be it with the power of NAACP, be it with the power of elected officials and being involved and engaged, so that we can bring attention to those areas and make sure that they get the investment and the resources, not that it's charity, but that they require and that they need and that they're entitled to. And so that is the part of civic engagement. It's not just voting. It is being involved and having a voice at every decision-making table. And that's been, what I've dedicated my career to.
Last minute, and it's probably not a fair enough time for this question, but does it drive you a little crazy where you'll see people criticize the crime or the prison system, but they don't want to invest on the other side into helping these communities so we don't end up with more crime, we don't end up with people behind bars? It's almost like there's a disconnect sometime, like, yeah, I want more of this, but I don't want to pay for that, that kind of thing.
Well, not only that, there is being able to see things as issues of poverty and lack of access. And how do we break that chain? How do we break that so that people have the access, have the opportunities, have the resources to be able to care for themselves and their family? Similarly, when we're talking about gun violence, people often equate when we're protesting or we're rallying and bringing attention to an issue, and then they'll say, oh, well, we don't see the same thing happening as it pertains to gun violence in your community. And I often push back and say, when we're talking and advocating in the budget for more resources for after school or teen centers or jobs and things of that nature, that is all to address violence in our community, because it is what needs to happen is the resources that need to be invested in our communities in order to break that stronghold of violence and persistent poverty.
All right. Well, L. Joy Williams, I could talk to you for another half hour, but we have to go. Thank you for coming on today. We do appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
All right. The issues faced by home caregivers did not see a resolution this legislative session. When we come back, we'll hear from a state senator working to bring changes to the CDPAP and what he's hoping to accomplish, how this legislative session is ending. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. We're continuing to follow the ongoing issues with the Consumer-Directed Personal Assistance Program, also known as CDPAP.
The program allows the elderly or disabled to choose their own home caregiver, with CDPAP providing the framework for those caregivers to be paid for their care.
Now, the issues began when the Department of Health consolidated the program from multiple payroll processors to just one, the change forcing thousands of caregivers to transition to that company.
According to caregivers, that transition caused their issues with payments. Advocates had pushed for legislation to bring changes to the program, but it failed to pass this session.
Lawmakers will be holding a public hearing next month to determine what steps next to take.
Joining us now to give additional insight on the situation surrounding CDPAP is State Senator James Skoufis. He's a Democrat representing the 42nd District. Senator, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So for people that don't know, what exactly is CDPAP?
Yeah, CDPAP is the Consumer Directed Personal Assistance Program. And I guess the most basic explanation for it, if you're not familiar with the program, is this is the state supported initiative and funding that goes to support home health aides and caregivers. Sometimes it's family members, sometimes it's outside professionals who come to an individual's home and take care of them there in their own home, their own personal, comfortable setting. Instead of, in many cases, in the absence of this program, these folks would wind up in nursing homes and long-term care facilities. And so it has grown in popularity over the years. There are, in terms of employees and consumers, hundreds of thousands of individuals who are stakeholders in the CDPAP program. And last year, there was a very significant transition that begun where we consolidated. There were about 700 of these sort of intermediary programs that facilitate, these home health aides and payments to one entity. They're called fiscal intermediaries. So we went from 700 to one. The transition was bumpy. There are some questions around the contracting for this one company, but in a nutshell, that's what the CDPAP program is.
Now, I know there's been some issues with it. Can you talk about some of the problems and what do you think could help remedy them?
Yeah, so there are a number of layers here that we're going to be digging into, and certainly at the top of everyone's mind, and I and every one of my colleagues have heard it from many constituents, there was a very significant lag when it came to transitioning both the patients, the consumers, as well as the employees from the 700 or so entities to the one fiscal intermediary, the one company that's going to be administering this program throughout the state. And obviously, top of mind was making sure that there was no or very little impact on care. And we've heard many stories and many instances from constituents where they feel that there was an impact on care. Similarly, we have many instances, claims of non-payment from these employees. They were getting paid before, they made the transition, and now they're going weeks and weeks and weeks without pay, and some of them are no longer able to work without pay, which stands to reason. And so those are some of the concerns I am also focused on as we move forward with this hearing and investigative look, is how did this one company get this one contract? We've heard many allegations from competing companies that their bids were unduly disqualified. They believe that there was bid rigging that took place. I'm not entering this public hearing and this investigative effort with any preconceived notions. I want to get to the truth. I want to get to the facts. But one of those fact patterns that I really want to dig into is how did this company get the contract? And we want to make sure that they got it fairly and justly, and there was no unwarranted undue influence.
And that hearing will be happening next month, correct?
July 9th, correct.
Is there anything else that you would like to see come out of that hearing?
Well, look, the most important thing that we're going to be digging into is, there are a lot of people with a lot of questions. There's been a lot of confusion over the past year and change since this all really started in earnest. And we want to at least get answers and get clarity where clarity is needed, so that even if people don't like the answers, even if people don't like the clarity, what I don't want to see persist is confusion and concerns that fall on deaf ears. And there are, right or wrong, fair or unfair, people that feel that way, and quite frankly, legislators who feel that way. And so that's number one. And then depending on what those answers are, what that clarity looks like, and quite frankly, how cooperative or uncooperative our witnesses are, we want to make sure that the right people who have those answers show up and testify under oath. the hearing will inform, will instruct what our next steps are, if any.
And I know the legislative session has already come to an end, but is there any pieces of legislation you think could help this issue?
Well, again, I think that perspective is going to be better informed once we get through the hearing and we hear from folks with testimony. And so there are a number of pieces of legislation, including a couple that have been introduced by the co-chair for this hearing. That's Senator Gustavo Rivera, the health chairman. And so whether it's those bills or other legislative attempts or other activity, whether it be, agency oversight, further engagement with regulators, we as a legislature are going to take stock of what happens in this hearing and then go from there.
And I know we're running out of time, but my final question for you is, can you talk about the importance of at-home care?
It's critically important, when an individual becomes disabled, when they become frail, when they need help, no one wants to go to a nursing home. That ought to be a setting of last resort. People want to age in place. They've been in their home for years, if not decades, and that is their comfortable space and where they want to continue aging if at all possible. And so the CDPAP program does allow for tens, if not many more thousands of New Yorkers to be able to, instead of being relegated to a nursing home, a completely foreign place for them, to allow them to stay in their own home with a level of care. And so it's incredibly important. Now, it has grown in popularity. It has become more expensive. One would argue, and the supporters of the program do argue, that as expensive as maybe CDPAP has become, it's still less expensive for Medicaid and government and the public than if those people were going to nursing homes. But it is a very complex set of issues. It's a very important program, and we want to make sure that that option is preserved for New Yorkers who want to remain in their homes and age in place.
All right, we'll have to leave it right there. Senator Skoufis, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be on the lookout to see what comes of that hearing. Thank you so much.
Thank you as always.
Early voting has already begun in New York City in the Democratic mayoral primary. As challengers continue to nip at former Governor Andrew Cuomo's lead, we'll break down the latest polling.
Welcome back. Turning now to the race for New York City mayor. With less than a week until primary day, former Governor Andrew Cuomo remained the frontrunner according to the recent polls.
Here's reporter Henry Rossoff with Pix 11 in New York City to break down the events from this past week.
Some really intense questions today for Queens Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani about language that many Jewish people find offensive. But let's begin by talking about the new Marist poll released today. The last good independent poll before Election Day shows former Governor Andrew Cuomo has the most first-choice votes of this ranked choice voting Democratic mayoral primary. He's 11 points ahead of Queens Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani. 11% of voters remain undecided. Marist also ran a ranked choice voting simulation, and after all the lower candidates are eliminated, Cuomo defeats Mamdani in the Marist poll 55% to 45%. Just today, we sat down with Governor Kathy Hochul for an upcoming episode of Pix on Politics, and we asked her about the race for mayor and potentially working with Cuomo once again.
I have such respect for the voters of New York City that I will work with whomever they want me to.
Still, the Marist poll, which shows Cuomo winning, was done about a week ago. Since then, comptroller and mayoral candidate Brad Lander was detained by ICE. There was a second mayoral debate. Lander and Mamdani cross-endorsed each other. Mamdani was endorsed by Bernie Sanders, and Cuomo picked up key support in Orthodox Jewish communities. Meanwhile, Mamdani Wednesday was endorsed by Maya Wiley, who came close to becoming mayor 4 years ago.
I am like so many New Yorkers who have wondered over these last 4 years what life would have been like had we made the right decision in 2021.
At the endorsement event, Mamdani faced tough questions after the National Holocaust Museum condemned his defense of the phrase globalize the Intifada, a term that's been used as a rallying cry to attack and murder Jews. Mamdani has argued it means different things to different people, and for Palestinians and Muslims, it means the struggle for freedom and rights. He says he does not want to ban or weaponize words. He grew emotional talking about his own experience and how anti-Semitism as an issue has been weaponized by his rivals, including former Governor Cuomo.
I've said at every opportunity that there's no room for anti-Semitism in this city, in this country. I get messages that say the only good Muslim is a dead Muslim. I get threats on my life.
Former Governor Cuomo has been getting better about offering opportunities to ask questions, but he did not have a forward-facing campaign event today. He did release a statement saying that Mamdani and some of this language is fueling anti-Semitism. In the newsroom, Henry Rossoff, Pix 11 News.
Stick around. Back with a look at the week ahead in just a bit.
If you have a comment or story idea, let us know. You can email us at news@news10.com. You can also reach out on X at WTEN.
Finally, in Empire State Weekly, we're continuing to follow developments surrounding immigration here in New York State. This follows the arrest of the New York City Comptroller Brad Lander by some ICE agents. Some are questioning the law surrounding that arrest.
This all comes as frustration against ICE remains high following those protests against ICE arrest in California. Next week, we'll look to speak with an immigration expert on the latest steps the state is taking and the conditions immigrants are facing.
For now, from all of us here at Empire State Weekly, I'm John Gray.
And I'm Jamie DeLine. We'll see you here next week.
Don't you forget, you can watch this show, Empire State Weekly, all over New York State. Here's the full schedule of the show on 10 TV stations across the great state of New York.